In today's world, we have a habit, we have a lifestyle in which we like to upgrade our physical possessions, our physical conditions. You want a new car every couple of years. You want to remodel the house once in a while. You want to get a new wardrobe, not because there's anything wrong with the old one, but because you can improve. Why not? If it can be more elegant, if it could be more glamorous, if it could be more pleasing to the eye, why not? So we have this very common everyday practice that you upgrade. They produce a nicer product, you buy the nicer product. And that's fine if we do the same in other areas. Why shouldn't our behavior at home be upgraded from time to time? Why shouldn't it become more beautiful, more elegant, even more glamorous? So if we balance that and we improve across the board in all areas, life would be very good. So, for example, how do you speak to your spouse? What tone do you use? It's important. I remember this woman told me that she and her husband, they can't seem to agree on anything. And she says, you know, I tell him that he shouldn't do that, and I explain to him why it's not good for him to do that, and he keeps doing it anyway. And I said, excuse me, but your finger is bothering me. I said, you're not a kindergarten teacher by any chance? She says, yeah, I teach first grade. I said, I think I know what your problem is. You talk to your husband with the same tone and the same gestures as you use in the classroom. I wouldn't listen to you either. So what tone do you use when you speak to your spouse? Whatever it is, even if it's good and proper and so on, doesn't it need an upgrade every now and then? Can it use a little improvement? Like, for example, you call your spouse from the other side of the house. Don't do that. It's not nice. You want to talk? Go to where your spouse is and talk. A dog you call. So it may be totally innocent. It doesn't mean anything. You're not being disrespectful. But if you upgrade, then that wouldn't happen. If the tone becomes more elegant, more dignified, more respectful, it can only help the relationship across the board. And something as small as that can have an amazingly positive effect. You probably heard the story. When I first came to Minnesota, straight out of Crown Heights, out of Yeshiva, I went to this guy's house to invite him to come for a Shabbaton. I'm sitting there talking to him, a Minnesotan, typical out-of-town Jew. And I'm telling him about Chabad house, the Shabbos, he should come with his wife. His 12-year-old daughter comes into the room. And she says, are we going or not? And he says, go ask your mother. So she says, it's almost a predictable, typical conversation. She says, I asked her. She said to ask you. Pretty normal, right? Rather harmless. But I wasn't used to that language. And it bothered me. I've gotten used to a lot worse. But at that time, I was still innocent, and it bothered me. And without thinking, I said to her, you know, you don't refer to your mother as she. She said, and this girl gives me this look like, did I ask you? You know, that only a teenager can. So, wasn't my business. Okay, fine. Anyway, later that night, the father calls me and says, I want to thank you what you did today. I said, what did I do? I invited you to come for Shabbos. Are you coming? He says, no, what you said to my daughter. I thought he'd be angry about it. He says, an amazing thing happened. When our son came home, 10-year-old, I heard my daughter say to him, you know, you're not supposed to say she about mom. And the atmosphere in the home has changed. Which basically means the children now feel like they are the children in the family, and the parents now feel like they are the parents in the family. Before that, it wasn't very clear. The definitions, the relationships, the roles were not clearly defined. And now that they have this awareness, you can't just say she about your mother. Wow, that means she's really a mother. And if I don't say it, then I'm really being a daughter. It changed the atmosphere in the home. Little things, but proper things, make all the difference in the world. There's this woman, child psychologist, wrote a book, maybe you've seen it, Blessings of a Skinned Knee. Anybody? Huh? Blessings of a Skinned Knee. I'm not recommending the book. I'm just saying she's a Jewish woman, she's a child psychologist, and she wrote this book. The point that she makes in the book is that when she went to school to study child psychology, she was told that her patients, her clients, would be coming from broken families, dysfunctional families, or disadvantaged families. And that's why the children will have issues, and you're going to help them with those issues. She's been working now, she's been a professional for almost 15 years. And she's very puzzled, because the vast majority of all of her clients for the last 15 years have not been from disadvantaged families because they can't afford it. It hasn't been from broken families because they don't come for therapy. And it hasn't been from dysfunctional families because they don't seek help. And yet she's busy. So she doesn't understand, where are all these issues coming from? It's not what they taught her in school. One day, she happened to attend a class with her conservative rabbi on Kibbud Av V'Em. And she heard for the first time in her life that you're not allowed to sit in your father's chair. And a light bulb went off in her head. And from then on, every child that she sees, she asks, do you sit in your father's chair? And recommends that they stop immediately. And that puts them on the path to recovery, to improvement, better than any method she's ever used. And she explains it. If you can sit in your father's chair, your borders have been violated. Anyway, when I read it, I just skimmed, and I thought, well, that's an interesting, got to think about this a little more. But the very next day, this mother asked me to talk to her 11-year-old, who was impossible. So I didn't know what. So I'm sitting there, I'm talking to him. I said, let me ask you something. Do you sit in your father's chair? He says, yeah. I said, that's the problem. He said, why? I don't know. Sounded good. So let me ask you a different question. Does your dog sit in your father's chair? He says, yeah. I said, that's a problem. He says, why? I said, I don't know. But let me ask you a different question. Does your dog sleep in your bed? He says, yes. What's the problem? I said, if you came home from a baseball game and you have a bat in your hand and you walk into the house and your father and your dog are killing each other, who are you going to hit? This was an intelligent 11-year-old with high moral standards. So he said, listen to this, he said, well, it depends on who started it. But it's very logical. I said, now you're crazy. And it began when you sat in your father's chair. You sit in your father's chair, the dog sits in your father's chair, the dog sleeps in your bed. You don't know who's who, you don't know what's what. All the borders are confused. By simply recognizing that you don't talk to your mother with the same word or the same tone that you use with a friend, the family can become healthy just from that alone. Because it starts to feel like a family. I was at a hotel once for a Shabbaton. This mother asked if I would sit down with her and her teenage daughter because they have an issue that they need to discuss. The girl is going out with a guy. The mother doesn't like this guy. He's not good. He's not reliable, whatever. Blah, blah. And they're arguing about it. So they want to sit with me and work it out. We sit down, and the mother starts telling me about how she's raising the daughter by herself, how hard that is. And now with this boyfriend that she really doesn't trust and doesn't like, it's really, and she starts to cry. The mother starts to cry. I look at the daughter, 16-year-old, 17-year-old. I look at the daughter, and she rolls her eyes. The mother's crying again. Here goes. So I got up, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't. And I left. The mother calls me to the room and says, we didn't even get to talk about the boy. Why did you leave? I said, there's really nothing to talk about. You're not her mother, she's not your daughter, so it's none of your business who she dates. She says, that's what she says. She rolls her eyes when you cry. She's not your daughter. And you don't notice it because you're so used to it. You're not a mother. So who she's dating is the least of your problems. Maybe you should try being a family again. Maybe sit down with your daughter and say, how would you like to play house? Let's play house. I'll be the mommy, you be the daughter. Let's start all over again. So there are things that are so fundamental and so simple. You don't roll your eyes at your mother. You don't call her she. You don't sit in her chair. What does that accomplish? Now you have a mother. And the same is true between spouses. If you can speak to your spouse the same way you speak to a stranger, then something is wrong with this relationship. Maybe not terribly wrong, not criminal, but it's not appropriate. It's not right. And if you don't treat it right, it can't thrive. It's like if you have plants in the house. Certain plants need this much water. Not less, not more. Other plants need more sunlight. If you don't give the plant what it needs, how do you expect it to thrive? So every relationship is a delicate arrangement, and it has certain conditions under which it thrives. If you don't give it those conditions, then what do you expect? So all the advice in the world is not going to help. We once had in Minneapolis, there was this couple, a husband and a wife, psychologists, who traveled and gave workshops, lectures, whatever, on how to avoid arguments. They were very good. They were good actors, they were good psychologists, and they presented this little, they play acted the whole theory on stage. So we were sitting there, auditorium full of people, and they basically demonstrated certain words lead to arguments, and certain words resolve the argument, dissolve the argument. Instead of saying, why can't you, you're supposed to say, it makes me feel bad. You know, you've heard all that stuff. Anyway, they demonstrated it very nicely and played it all out. As soon as they were finished, a woman raises her hand, and she says, that's all fine if you don't want to argue. You're assuming that the couple doesn't want to argue. When my husband comes home, he's looking for a fight. So this whole theory doesn't work. So really what we need is, we need to find out why it is so inappropriate to start a fight with your wife. If you don't convince me of that, then don't tell me how not to fight. So we got to go to the heart of the issue. What is appropriate for a marriage? What is appropriate between husband and wife? And whatever it is, it can use an upgrade. It can always use an upgrade. And nobody needs to tell you what that upgrade could be, because it's not complicated. It's not complicated. There's a tone, and you know what that tone is, because you hear it in other people, and it really grates on the ears. How is it, for example, that you see couples who talk to each other with such a lack of respect that it's shocking, while at the same time they are both very nice people? Popular, everybody likes them, they're mentioned, they're decent, they're friendly, they're respected. Only with each other, they're horrible. Which means they have more respect for strangers than they have for each other. How does this happen? Or how do you avoid this from happening? But you know when you hear it, how inappropriate, how offensive it is. So something as simple as you're sitting by a table with other people, and your wife says something, and you say, oh, stop it, you don't know what you're talking about. This is jungle behavior. You didn't mean anything vicious, it's just the way you talk. But about your own wife, in front of people? You would never say that if you were talking to a stranger. So how do we get so careless? How do we get so callous? How do we become so inconsiderate with the people who are most important in our lives? There is, of course, that famous saying that familiarity breeds contempt. You've become too familiar. You're too comfortable with each other. And when you get to be comfortable with each other, it breeds contempt. Contempt is an ugly word. And yet, there's some truth to that. Familiarity breeds ugliness. So how is a couple, a married couple, how are they supposed to avoid becoming familiar? Shouldn't they be familiar? They're supposed to remain strangers? So there's a certain familiarity that bonds people, makes them closer. And there's a certain familiarity that destroys all decent feelings. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was looking for a secretary, for a maskil, the people the Rebbe wanted didn't want. Because they were afraid that the familiarity of being in the Rebbe's room day in and day out would somehow ruin the edelkeit and the holiness that they're supposed to feel, and it would damage their feelings as a chassid. There's a certain kind of familiarity that is not healthy. It's not even nice. And we have to identify what that familiarity is and avoid it at all costs. If we want to trace the problem back to its source, it begins with our own parents. How did we speak to our parents? Did we use the proper tone with them? In other words, are we in the habit? Have we trained ourselves? Are we familiar with the different tones that you use with different people? The respectful tone that we use with parents would, of course, help when we get married. We transfer that respectful tone to our spouse. If we didn't have it with our parents, where would it suddenly show up? Why would we suddenly get it? But even if we don't have the habit, we certainly know right from wrong, and it's not a difficult thing to introduce the right tone when we speak to each other. People go for therapy often because they feel that they have some serious, deep problems. And they're intimidated by their own problem. Sometimes, instead of looking for an answer to the big problem, if we simply make the right adjustments, it resolves itself. So, in our lives today, our physical surroundings, our physical circumstances have been upgraded many times. We live decent lives, which is a very good thing. We have clean homes, we have nice clothes, we have decent cars. I can't remember the last time somebody asked me to jumpstart their car. 10 years ago? 10 years ago, it was a daily thing. Driving down the road, how often did you pass a car with a flat tire? Recently? So we've upgraded, which is a good thing. In fact, that itself might solve a marriage problem. If the house is not upgraded, it could cause a deterioration in the whole relationship. So, Baruch Hashem, our lives have been upgraded. I remember visiting the first shliach that I've ever, out-of-town shliach, in Wisconsin. He lived in an apartment, and the kitchen sink was hanging off the wall by a thread. And that was normal. We've come a long way. So our physical surroundings, our physical conditions have been upgraded. They're decent, they're dignified, they're clean. It's nice. It's time to upgrade our language, time to upgrade our communication, time to upgrade our consideration of each other. Got to keep pace. One final thing. Any time that you want to criticize, whether it's your child or your spouse, wait till the next day. Wait till the next day. When you prepare, when you think in advance, when you want to tell something to your child or to your spouse, but you wait. Wait for the right minute, for the right setting, for the right mood, and then you say it, it's always a home run. But if you say it the minute you feel it, not only doesn't it help, it creates uncomfortable feeling. So the Rebbe said, my father called me in and said, I noticed this morning when you shared your candy, this morning. It was now afternoon. Why didn't the father call him in immediately? Why did he call him and say, give him more of that candy, you selfish little child? The fact that he waited makes the message so much more powerful because there's so much goodness in it. First of all, you waited to tell me this? You're so nice. Number two, you've been thinking about me all afternoon? What kind of compliment that is? You're really concerned? You didn't forget what happened this morning? I forgot. So this must be serious. There's so many good things in the waiting, in the choosing the moment. But just to react, you're not even trying to teach. You're not even making an attempt at chinuch. You're just even with a spouse. You want to say something, you want to convince your spouse of something. Don't say it at the moment when the crisis comes, when you're annoyed by something your spouse did or said. That's not the time. Wait till tomorrow. And then say it. By then you will have the right words. By then you will sound good. By then, what you will say will be a compliment. And it will have a positive effect. There's only one problem with that. If you wait until tomorrow, you won't say it. You'll forget. Somebody once asked in a class, is it okay to spank your children? I said, yeah, sure. The only thing is, don't do it out of anger when you lose control. Make a list of the things you're going to spank your child for. Make a list. And hang it on your refrigerator. Next time you get angry, you want to spank the child, check the list. If it's not on the list, you can't spank him. So it was quiet in the room for a few minutes. And then one of the women said, I can't think of anything to put on the list. If you're not angry, you're not upset, cold-bloodedly, premeditated, what would you spank your child for? Hard to think of anything. And yet if you don't think, you spank him all the time for every little thing. If you would wait till the next day to offer your criticism or your input or your idea, your opinion, not only wouldn't it be offensive, it would be so elegant, it would be so respectful. It would be so dignified that it would have to have a good effect. And it has a good effect on you too. The fact that you waited makes you into a mensch.
Partner with Rabbi Friedman. Visit itsgoodtoknow.org/support.